Welcome back, attractive and well-educated watchers, to a new episode of Could They Survive 40k. Last time we tangled with the idea of around 10,000 Saiyans getting plopped into the 40k universe, and toyed around with the idea of them being accepted as abhumans, them getting taken in by Khorne, and a potential scenario where they made their own way as well as others. This time around, by popular demand, we'll be exploring the survivability of the Goa'uld from the Stargate franchise, explicitly Stargate SG-1. Cards on the table? We used to be a huge fan of this series. The whole family would get in front of the TV every week like clockwork to watch the newest episode, and it was once upon a time where we could remember individual lines from niche episodes that nobody else even knew existed. While we've not watched in a long time, we're going to be starting SG-1 up again soon enough and getting back into it. We think this vote probably inspired that, so thanks guys. On principle, we will not be using any specifically named Goa'uld characters, and instead will be relying on random unnamed System Lord number 44, and this will not be including technologies later stolen from the much more powerful alien factions like the Asgard or Ori. Instead, we'll be dealing with a random Goa'uld faction that would have been standard in the Stargate universe as of the beginning of the SG-1 series. We know we said in the original vote that there would be Tok'ra, but then our brains started working and we remembered that they are an extremely specific faction that ultimately wouldn't mesh well with the scenario anyway. Instead, we'll be creating our own System Lord from scratch, who we'll name Benten, after the Japanese goddess of luck and good fortune. And before you ask, yes, we are fully aware of the irony in her name. That is on purpose. But before we get to the scenarios, as usual, let's crunch some lore and get some context. The Goa'uld are a species of ancient parasitic serpentine sociopaths with genetic memory and the ability to take over human bodies and puppet them around, keeping their humanoid host healthy and allowing them to live for extremely long periods of time. Possessing of highly advanced technology, Goa'uld society is a complex breed of space feudalism, not actually much different from the 40k universe. Just like in the 40k universe, various Goa'uld system lords are constantly at various levels of warfare between each other, ruling as literal gods to the less technologically advanced races that they conquer. After conquering those species, they then use shock and awe tactics to intimidate those less developed than they, and promptly thereafter outlaw any learning or understanding of their technology to keep education and capacity to resist low. Their hold on their territories has persisted for so long, and with such an iron grip, that they have even genetically altered a portion of humanity into the Jaffa, a slave species of humans that have been altered to be stronger, longer-lived, healthier, and more subservient to the needs of their Goa'uld masters. While otherwise outwardly identical, Jaffa possess a pouch at the age of implantation on their stomachs through which they can incubate a Goa'uld larva after around 10 years old, and other parts of their internal anatomy as different due to millennia of genetic tampering, even though their ancestors once hailed from Earth. One noteworthy difference is a much atrophied immune system. The Goa'uld larval symbiote ultimately takes care of the need for an immune system, so this engineered lack of an immune system in Jaffa makes them reliant on symbiosis. Goa'uld technology is powered by Naquadah, a cool science fiction chemical that can be used for everything from powering satellites to weapon ammunition to teleportation ring fuel to just straight up being currency. Possessing a higher density than pure gold and mined by Goa'uld out of the ground, Naquadah also naturally flows through the veins of the Goa'uld themselves, and they secrete it into the systems of those that they parasitize, allowing them to use special weapons that the Goa'uld have made which only respond to entities with Naquadah in their bodies. Even after only having had a Goa'uld within her for a fairly short period of time, Colonel Samantha Carter was able to use special technologies that only responded to Naquadah many years after having separated from her symbiote, implying that Naquadah is such a dense chemical, so difficult to get out of the body, that it will remain within a human for the rest of their natural life, even after the removal of the symbiote. But what sort of weapons does Naquadah power, you ask? Great question. There are a lot of cool items that the Goa'uld have used on screen, but we really have to narrow it down to only about half a dozen big-ticket items for the sake of this scenario, as they're the ones that are going to make the difference one way or the other. Number 1. The Matok, or Staff Weapon. The glorious Goa'uld Staff Weapon. Everything you need for a plasma cannon in the form of a 2-meter death stick with a thick nubbly bottom end for beating people up, and with a pointy end that opens up and shoots plasma bolts at people, providing you don't just stab a bitch with it. Capable of killing most humans with a single shot at center of mass, these staff bolts can even penetrate the average Jafa's body armor if it's a dead-on hit, making us wonder why they bother with armor in the first place. Seemingly able to be recalibrated at one's leisure, the Matok can be lowered in power to merely hurt the shit out of someone, or have its power raised considerably to be able to punch through several feet of stone, bulletproof glass, or even metal walls. Concussive shockwaves of such high energy impact can knock people over and potentially even cause internal damage. Heat from the plasma is so hot that injuries caused by a Matok don't bleed, but instead burned clothes and leave the victim in extreme pain. Simply put, the Matok is an incredibly intimidating and effective weapon, with a seemingly infinite amount of charges to fire on high into the enemy. However, it has its shortcomings. First and foremost, the average staff weapon has a maximum effective range of maybe 70 meters, and its bolts are what we in the metafictional analysis community call visibly slow. It might take something along the lines of 4 or 5 seconds for such a bolt to reach its target at maximum range, and even with concussive blasts, it's entirely possible to simply dodge a staff weapon blast at point blank, not entirely dissimilar from the painfully slow blaster bolts of Star Wars. While extremely effective at destroying things, the Matok is clearly an unwieldy and slow-firing weapon, ensuring the average user of the weapon must either cradle the staff under their arm and fire from the hip, or position the staff on their shoulders like a rocket launcher, neither of which aids particularly well in accuracy. Indeed, their accuracy is so poor that an extremely well-established and reputed marksman is only able to make 2 out of 3 shots at a stationary target some 10 to 20 yards away, and with a fire rate of only something along the lines of 3 shots in 5 seconds. This is a painfully slow and inaccurate method of combat, and it shows in the way the Jaffa fight, that being in great firing lines of people shooting from the hip into open areas and hoping to hit something out of sheer numbers alone. Moreover, by the year 2000, the United States military was able to make special ceramic polymer vest inserts for their body armor that would consistently stop the average staff blast and keep the victim alive. All in all, the Matok is the perfect example of what Jack O'Neill calls a weapon of terror. They are designed to be flashy, scary, and dangerous, but not accurate or fast-moving. They are designed to intimidate the enemy, whereas a simple gun is designed to kill the enemy. The Matok, with this in mind, is the perfect example of how the Goa'uld do things. They are more inclined to scare and cow than actually go to war, and what combat they do have is highly ceremonial and based on bravery and appearance, rather than actually trying to kill one's enemies. Upscaled versions of these things are also placed on Goa'uld fighter ships. Number 2. The Zat'nik'tel, or the Zat. The Goa'uld standard sidearm, the Zat, as they call them in the series, is a pistol-type thing that follows a simple set of rules. You shoot once, you incapacitate, or at least it hurts a lot. You shoot twice, your target's dead. You shoot 3 times, your target disappears without even leaving a bit of dust behind, just decorporealized and gone forever. Not using ammunition, SG-1 would eventually end up using these things more than standard firearms in the later series, and the showrunners explicitly hated them and wished they'd never been made in the first place. The idea behind instant disintegration was a super dumb deus ex machina that they admit they didn't even use consistently. That being said, the 3 shots and you're literally gone for everything is very nice, and, while also not extremely accurate and based on shock and awe tactics, the Zat is a good weapon that everyone in the actual series seems to love. We could go on about it, but it's really just more of the same as with the staff weapon. Not terribly accurate, can't shoot very fast, though much faster than the staff weapon, and is somewhat inconsistent in its on-screen abilities. Number 3. Transportation rings. While they have shuttles and stuff, transportation rings are far and away the most common way for Goa'uld to get from one place to another place on planet or in between ships in a given fleet. Made by Naquadah, powered by Naquadah, and listening only to those with Naquadah in their veins, the transportation rings collapse those inside of them down to a matter stream before transporting them off to another set. Mobile versions exist, though they are rare, and the standard versions are apparently completely mass-produced to insanity. Every ship has at least a few sets of these babies, and they have been shown to be able to transport people in and out of places anywhere from space to thousands of feet underground. People have used them to get away from big bads, to introduce themselves to big bads, to transport bombs to safe explosion ranges, and even more. Where do they go when they are done being used? We don't know. Don't talk about it. the Karakesh, the ribbon device. This fancy little glove thing allows anyone with Naquita in their veins and enough mental chutzpah to use telekinesis, activate transportation rings, create force fields, torture people, absorb zap blasts, fire energy beams, heal injuries, and some other things too, but this is all that really matters for the scenario. The Goa'uld upper class would use these items to do all sorts of cool shit, and we see ribbon devices being used for many seasons in the series doing this aforementioned cool shit. Last thing, they can wirelessly control other Goa'uld technology far enough away that it can hypothetically be in orbit without delay or error. Number 5. Hyperdrive. Just as with any good science fiction setting, the Goa'uld have to get around. And fortunately, the standard Goa'uld ship can propel someone across the known galaxy at roughly 32,000 times the speed of light. As this is absolutely comparable to last episode's attack ball, it might take just over 3 years to make it across the entire Milky Way galaxy, but you won't be dropping into literal hell while you do it. The walls won't grow faces that make fun of your lack of a love life, and the demons won't come bursting out of your head just for sleeping while you're carrying out a post-sea maneuver in hyperspace. We won't go on the nonsense of how hyperdrive actually works in Stargate, just know it's important to measure at what speed the Goa'uld will be traveling. Finally, number 6, the sarcophagus. This is actually our favorite piece of Goa'uld technology. Ever. Bar none. Full stop. The sarcophagus is probably one of the most powerful and useful things the Goa'uld have at their disposal, in this scenario or any other. If you are hurt, even hurt a lot, you can get thrown into the sarcophagus and it'll put you back together. Got a horrible disease? Sarcophagus will heal it. Got an arm off? Just get into the sarcophagus. It'll grow that right back for you. Come down with a nasty case of death? Yeah, that's no problem at all for the Goa'uld sarcophagus. Super easy, barely an inconvenience. The sarcophagus can even keep you from getting old for a while, as a normal human got to the ripe old age of 700 before eventually dying of natural causes, and Lord Yu lived for several millennia with the help of the sarcophagus. Unfortunately, as seen in the case of Lord Yu, it has a bit of a problem with, brains. So it allegedly can't heal major brain damage, and it also can't, we suppose, keep you from going more crazy than a $37 bill. It doesn't grant true agelessness or immortality. Just fights it. And of course, it makes you go crazy! The Tok'ra stopped using it for that specific reason, and while all Goa'uld are more than a bit sociopathic, the sarcophagus is a huge addition to that which assuredly drives them more and more insane in time. It can also be used to brainwash people, give them false memories, and bring on megalomaniacal tendencies. Eventually, the sarcophagus gets straight up addicted, until you feel the need to use it every single day. There are other things that the Goa'uld have at their disposal, but at the end of the day, there's nothing else that specifically sets them apart from the rest of the 40k universe. We could talk about how they are more than happy to use children as literal bombs, but at the very least, the 40k universe is largely ambivalent to such things, and the Dark Eldar just regard that as good, clean fun for the whole family. They do that sort of thing every day, sometimes twice, even before breakfast. We could talk about how the Goa'uld really seem to like bombs, like really big bombs. But so does literally everyone else in the 40k universe, especially the orcs. So the above technologies have specifically been set aside because they differentiate the Goa'uld and their horrifyingly psychopathic faction from all of the other horrifyingly psychopathic factions in the 40k galaxy. Finally, they have cool, pyramid-shaped spaceships that sometimes get up to 700 meters long and 650 meters wide. These have fighters that pop out and do stuff. Also remember that there's a lot more to the Goa'uld than we're showing here, but at the end of the day, we're just bringing up what our random OC Goa'uld System Lord #DoNotSteal would have, assuming that she was just the same as any other generic unnamed System Lord would have at the start of the series. If you want to see the full breadth and depth of what a completely developed and realized System Lord has at their disposal, we seriously encourage you to go watch the series. We had a lot of fun with it, and we're going to start watching it again very soon. Go check it out and have a great time watching the US military a la 1997 take down the forces of interstellar feudalism for America! For the sake of things, we'll assume that the goddess Benten, goddess of luck, beauty, fertility, good fortune, music, and the arts, arrives in the universe with a fleet of 20 Hottoks, a few more generic transport ships, a few 100,000 Jaffa, and a million or so human servants to start up her new society. Now, let's get on to the main show. Hey, kids! You know what heresy looks like? Well, once upon a time, there was some asshole that claimed he spoke with the power of a god and went on a megalomaniacal power grab across the Imperium of Man called the Reign of Blood. During that time, he functionally founded the Sisters of Battle, and when they found out that he did them dirty and lied to them, well, they took it personally, as all good Sisters of Battle do. And now, whenever someone does a heresy, the sisters have problems. Well, what the Goa'uld do is the epitome of heresy. They directly address themselves as gods, rule over the ignorant masses, and demand absolute loyalty and obedience from their servants. What's worse, the average Goa'uld is a disgusting xeno that parasitizes things in order to proliferate. And worse even still, they infect humans. They are a scourge, a blight on humanity, and must be destroyed at all costs, lest their heresy spread too far, as if it already hadn't spread far enough. If the Ecclesiarchy caught wind of the Goa'uld before they were able to settle down, it's no question that they would throw literally everything they had at the nasty spine leeches. And it would not be pretty. The Adeptus Sororitas is used to fight far more devastating and horrifying things. And they are used to fighting literal demons from literal hell that pop out of people's literal heads to shove your literal head in someone else's literal ass. They are not afraid of some asshole pretending to be a god with glowing eyes. In fact, they are enraged and encouraged by it. In scant decades, the entirety of the Imperial Creed would be upon them, swarming whatever world they got a hold of and scouring it with holy flames. The Goa'uld's standard tactic absolutely backfires on them, as they know little about how false gods are regarded in the 40k universe. Even planets that they can take are too entrenched in the worship of the Emperor to keep them safe. And, as this is a religious war with a religious purpose, and the foundation of gods literally fighting other gods, there is, simply put, no option for peace. Benton's tiny faction is quickly conquered and eradicated like so many during the High Crusade era in the first few decades after its arrival. Yeah, we know. Spooky shit having more than one worst-case scenario. But this is also the first time we found a faction that would actually struggle so much with the 40k universe. If a standard scenario is one where they survive, worst-case scenarios are where they end up not surviving. The Goa'uld are, even by 40k standards, a bit psychopathic. They are not merely bad, dictator-type people with delusions of grandeur, but rather horrifying, sociopathic alien monsters with genetic memory and an addiction to the sarcophagus, which makes them even more megalomaniacal. They explicitly delight in seeing the pain and suffering of others, in watching helpless inferiors bow and scrape at their feet, begging for their lives. They love watching the fear and terror sweep over the faces of said inferiors, hope disappearing and giving way to resignation or desperation as they die. They sometimes crucify people as examples, sometimes publicly execute them for show, often torture them, if only for the fun of it. While you might think that this faction would find common ground with the Dark Eldar, we're afraid it's much more unfortunate than that. The Dark Eldar and the Goa'uld would never get along, mostly because both of them respectively believe themselves to be the greatest shit since breathable air. Instead, they find themselves in direct and extremely violent competition. The Goa'uld, when torn apart with monomolecular blades, can be retrieved and put back together in the sarcophagus, and the Dark Eldar would quickly become annoyed at the constant rivalry for the who can be the most evil game. Even as Benton tries to build herself up, her territory would be constantly assaulted on all sides, and even from within, by the Drukhari bursting out of the webway and fucking everything up. Until, one day, a sarcophagus is captured. Now armed with the technology that can literally bring people back from the dead, the Dark Eldar are finally able to achieve an entirely new level of suffering. Finally! Death is not the end for those that they put through the endless suffering that fuels Kamara, able to power themselves off of the literal endless suffering provided by this new invention. The highest of the Dark Eldar are able to maintain themselves even beyond the borders of violent and bloody death. For the first time in Old Ones knows how long, the Dark Eldar numbers start swelling from the inclusion of a device that can make the suffering last forever. Made confident by their slowly bolstering numbers and constantly trying to steal whatever they can from the Goa'uld, they're able to gradually chip away at anything Benten manages to gain and transform whatever world she takes into broken planets full of terrified and downtrodden masses that inevitably give up on serving anyone at all. Driven into desperation by the excesses of both the Goa'uld and the Drukhari competing over just how despicable they can be, a few Goa'uld servants one day dream of freedom, or perhaps of turning the tables and becoming that which oppresses them. Chaos, ever so slowly, creeps in. And, distracted by their battles with the surrounding factions, and unable to keep the desperation from seeping into their interior ranks thanks to constant Dark Eldar incursions and raids, chaos takes hold of the Goa'uld from within, and consumes them. In this way, the Drukhari destroy the Goa'uld by proxy, driving them to be just as sadistic and fucked up as anything the Dark Eldar would ever consider. And the Goa'uld cannot hide in the webway from chaos like the Eldar can. Instead, they are free to rot. Maybe they'll last a century or two, but it's just not going to be a hopeful future for anyone. The Goa'uld are, if nothing else, all about that excess. They love dressing themselves up in fancy makeup and expensive outfits with tons of gold and silver all over them. They like to sit around in fantastical throne rooms surrounded by servants who feed them grapes and fan them with palm leaves and give them handjobs whenever they get too bored. They only want the best and continue all the time to indulge in any of their darkest and most depraved fantasies. You know who likes that sort of shit? Slaanesh does. That's right. Our goddess Benten is supposed to be a mighty standard example of the Goa'uld species, so we can only assume that, at some point, her wine-drinking and orgy-throwing, blood-painting, and peeled grape-eating is gonna attract she who thirsts. Sooner or later, Benten will get the feeling that she needs to go further. Nothing big, not even weird for a system lord. One day, after killing a peasant for accidentally meeting her eyes or some shit, she decides that the color of red that is his blood is just right for that painting she was making the other day, the one she couldn't get the right shade for. Then, eventually, she finds that the food she's eating just isn't good enough. She goes and berates the chefs, threatens them with death, tortures them, makes them cry. And when she has her next meal, she realizes that the tears they shed in the dough make the bread taste sweeter. And so, whenever she needs new red paint, she'll just kill someone. Whenever she's hungry, she'll whip a servant and extract their tears to salt her soup. The occasional orgy becomes a lifestyle of wallowing in lust and depravity. One day, the meat on her table becomes less flavorful. She demands of the cooks for better. She demands of the farmers for better. She demands of the court for better. And one day, she strikes down one of her Jaffa warriors for perceived negligence and kills him. Looking upon his dead body, with times being what they are, it would be a waste to let the meat go to the animals, wouldn't it? And so she goes not just for the tears of her victims, but their flesh as well. And she gets a taste for it, but it's still not enough. Before long, her entire lifestyle revolves around going to ever greater and more horrifying heights to scratch that itch. Given the regenerative properties of the sarcophagus, she can torture her victims and prolong their lives as long as she likes. She can brainwash everyone under her service to serve her twisted desires alone. She can use her technology to perform horrendous experiments on those loyal to her to make even more pleasurable servants. And eventually, she can reach out to the Dark Prince herself and attain the ultimate pleasure. And while Benten may have considered the Lord of Excess to serve her, to empower her, it is quite the opposite. Ben 10 is able to bring upon new technologies that Chaos has never had access to, and, with the power of her blood and Naquita in her hands, Slaanesh has very little reason to keep the System Lord alive. Certainly, for many centuries, Ben 10 has a glorious time with daemonettes and other hilariously grotesque pleasures that only Chaos can offer. However, eventually, having long lost focus on her original goals and having given herself entirely to pleasure and excess, Ben 10 is herself consumed by her own, followers, as her worlds are given over to Chaos and the demons of Slaanesh. In reality, the sort of corruption that Chaos provides is exactly what the Goa'uld are weak against. They love the scheming, the excess, the grotesquerie of their reign. They care not for brutal violence or the gift of Nurgle, but there is no reason to think they wouldn't find appeal in the ways of Tzeentch, and, more specifically, they probably fall right into the eager arms of She Who Thirsts. The Goa'uld will have a hard time getting safe anywhere in a universe where there is only war. While the Goa'uld are no stranger to internal conflict, they really are small fish in a grand ocean in their setting. Only able to take over much of the Milky Way galaxy in Stargate SG-1 because the Asgard were too busy with the replicators in the Ida galaxy, a completely different galaxy over which the Asgard had also gained complete control. While they have some extremely useful and consistent technologies like the transportation rings, sarcophagus, ribbon device, and hyperdrive, it's only going to be enough to set them apart from the other factions, not overtake them. Things like hyperdrive allow them to move at tens of thousands of times the speed of light safely through the galaxy without using the warp, and transportation rings are extremely consistent and will be able to allow them to get on and off planets and enemy ships with casual ease. However, their staff weapons and Zats are woefully inadequate for war when considering how the 40k universe operates. Without good accuracy, and able to only make around 3 shots in 5 seconds, their line formation tactics won't stand a chance against the countless trillions in human wave formations thrown at them by the Imperial Guard. Based on intimidating the enemy rather than consistently killing them, their staff weapons are quickly found to be unable to affect the minds of the average 40k warrior. There are far scarier weapons to deal with in Warhammer 40k, after all. Instead, Benton has to play it safe and play it cool for a few centuries alone if she wants to survive. Finding a nice world around a yellow sun, she settles down and keeps quiet, subjugating whatever species she finds and slowly reproducing children who themselves will serve her and the dynasty, knowing everything she does upon their birth. Quickly realizing that her staff weapons are not going to cut it in this exceedingly militarized universe, the first thing she does is start to upgrade them and design new weapons in accordance to the ways of war in this universe. Her ships, once regarded as large and in charge, are tiny compared to the ships that every other faction uses in 40k. Her people, in this universe, need to be consistently and brutally supervised, lest their heads explode and bring forth horrifying demons into this world that simply disappear when they die. And, perhaps worst of all, there is no peace capable of being forged with the humans of this universe, nor anyone else. They are the perfect example of the filthy Xeno that must be destroyed. They are the perfect reason to fight. Over the course of several centuries, moving carefully and staying under the radar of other 40k factions, Benton is able to carve out a small but capable civilization of a few hundred worlds without competition from other Goa'uld. A few dozen or even 100 systems fall under her sway before the rest of the galaxy is able to catch on to her scheming. Ben 10 is all too aware that she can only take planets that are not actively administered by the Imperium at large. Much like the Tau Empire, she will never have the brute force, tactical brilliance, infrastructure, or sheer population to overcome the big players in the galaxy, and instead will be forced to nestle into a new niche, accepting that they are no longer gods, but rather just another force trying to struggle on in the universe where there is only war. The Goa'uld are, in any case, somewhat rare. In this scenario, they start with only one Goa'uld and her personal servants and property. Well, there's a guy in the 40k universe that specifically collects very rare things. And very rare people. And anything else he seems to like the look of. In the scenario where the Goa'uld, even for a second, get the attention of the Eternal Curator, there's very little chance of their proliferation throughout the galaxy. Don't get us wrong, they'll certainly survive. Each and every ship, all of the Jaffa warriors, the human servants, everything will be meticulously preserved in stasis forevermore by the one entity in the entire 40k galaxy capable of preserving the Goa'uld, no matter what horrors may befall the universe around them. There is nothing rarer than the Goa'uld, and Trazyn the Infinite would want to lay claim to that rarest of all exhibits. What's worse, while Goa'uld technology and Necron technology may seem superficially similar, the stuff that Trazyn has at his disposal would absolutely ruffle-stomp the entire Goa'uld species with casual ease. Not only does he have access to some technology that even the Necrons fear, he also has stasis tech and time control at sufficient levels that even other chronomancers fall to his schemes. Suffice to say, there's simply nothing that Benten could do to stop him, if she eventually caught his interest. The Goa'uld are the perfect example of why the Imperium is as xenophobic as they are. They are hell-bent on turning humanity into the perfect slave species, holding them under endless subjugation, ignorance, and suffering. However, there is yet value in the Goa'uld while they still live. The Goa'uld have perfect genetic memory. They can freely recall the memories of all of the Goa'uld that came before them, and are born with this understanding. Every piece of technology that has ever been made, the name of every enemy they've ever slain, the recollection of every birthday they've ever had, and every body they've ever taken, all lies inside their minds. And all Goa'uld take interest in the technologies that they wield, since they do not trust their servants to understand advanced technology, and use said technology against them to cement their societal position as gods. If one were to take control of Benten, they could, for example, torture her and get the information from her. There are many ways to cause the Goa'uld within someone to feel pain, or even remove her to the death of the host. Then she could be put into more hosts. She could even be tortured repeatedly, and put into a sarcophagus to force her back to life. And, indeed, this has been done to system lords before to get information from them. If the Mechanicus got their hands on the goddess Benten, they would not only be unafraid of her alien nature and timeless knowledge, but rather they would become obsessed with it. Unintimidated by her paltry parlor tricks and more than willing to throw away billions of lives to get her technology, the descendants of Mars would stop at nothing to capture her and study her for all time. With the secrets of consistent teleportation, much greater ammunition capacity, safe hyperspace travel, sarcophagus technology, and so much more, the Mechanicus will learn all too quickly that Naquadah is the secret to this tech, and the only source they know of that supplies Naquadah is the Goa'uld. She would be forced to reproduce under close supervision, her every secret eventually revealed, and her body farmed in a grueling display that would leave her forever barely alive. For literal millennia, the goddess Benten would be harvested and healed, tortured and resurrected. She would be personally introduced to all of the horrors of the 40k universe, and her entire genetic line would come into existence with one terrifying reality deep in their minds. They now exist as living computers, made to provide the Imperium with technology, and their own secretions to keep that technology running. At some point, Benten, having thought herself so lucky, would come to the conclusion that luck can be bad as well. Her own existence is constant pain and torture, and as much as she wants to die, she will not be allowed. Forever imprisoned in some horrible vat, goggled sensors peering in and forcing her to exist, forcing her to reproduce and bring into life offspring that can only know one thing. They are no longer people. They are merely tools for humanity to use, livestock for humanity to milk. Perhaps the darkest fate the 40k universe could have provided lies here. She has no mouth, and she must scream. The Goa'uld, in their universe, were able to live at the top of the Milky Way galaxy's proverbial food chain for 20,000 years or so because they excelled at what they did. They were extremely good at carrying out the fantasy of being gods, ruling over primitive savages, and then leveraging the population power of those subjugated species to lift themselves to ever higher ranks of supremacy. But, by the end of the series, they showed just how unable to maintain themselves they were when faced with stronger and more technologically innovative species. As it is, the only reason they were able to hold on to the Milky Way galaxy for as long as they did was because the Asgard had to fight a war in an entirely different galaxy, which they also controlled. The Goa'uld specialized in making weapons that intimidated the enemy into submission, but, in Warhammer 40k, those weapons are not scary at all, and literally everyone is used to things being far more terrifying than Stargate tends to portray. The way they operate simply has little effect on anyone in the 40k universe with a name. Using their strategy in Warhammer 40k is like trying to use a fire Pokemon to get your Cascade badge. You can technically do it if you crunch early and are particularly crafty, but everything you do is gonna be not very effective, and everything they do is gonna be super effective. For reference, the 1997 US military, with some help and a convenient stationary portal, were able to beat them up. Weapons in the 40k universe are not to intimidate the enemy. They are made to kill the enemy. And SG-1 showed well enough that such tactics are far superior to the Goa'uld standard doctrine. Sure, when one of the Mega Chad system lords stepped up and started adapting Goa'uld technology, they started kicking our ass pretty hard there for a bit. But then we adapted, got friends, and turned back around to kick their asses just in time for the replicators and the Ori to show up and turn everything to shit. And of course, Benton isn't a Mega Chad system lord, but rather an example of the Goa'uld as a whole. Generic system lord, number 44. Totally original character, hashtag do not steal. If the Goa'uld and their servants don't hole up and be extremely quiet for a few centuries, they will be crusaded to death by the Ecclesiarchy, get in a who is more evil competition with the Dark Eldar and lose, or even fall to the psychic whispers of Slaanesh and Sciencey, tempting them toward their own demise. Even if they avoid that, they could still end up being steamrolled by interested private parties like Trazyn the Infinite, and, gods forbid, they could run afoul with the Mechanicus, who would take grotesque delight in introducing the galaxy's first biological standard template construct. The Goa'uld in this scenario are just too small, too self-interested, and too inflexible. Even if they survive, they'll just be another small-time power in the galaxy like the Tau or the Eldar, unable to expand meaningfully out into the universe where there is only war. Next time, we'll tackle Clifford the Big Red we mean dog. The Clifford the Big Red Dog. Yeah, that's right. And you can vote right now on Patreon for what we do after him. Standard sign-off, baby. Thanks a bunch for coming, everybody. Hope you liked what you saw here today. If you did, remember to like, subscribe, comment, share, go on down to our Patreon via that Linktree link in the description, and pledge even just $1 a month to help support the cause. Join the mighty ranks of all the lovely people in the credits section at every video on most of our channels, and get your name in the game on our Let's Play channels. Thanks a bunch for coming, everybody. Stay safe, stay inside, stay healthy, and of course remember to help each other. Bye!